What is up, guys and gals? Today we're going to show you how to break down, service, and reassemble an Avenger AV40 spinning reel. Okay, now first thing you should do is see if you can find a schematic for the reel so you know where you're going with this, but at the very least take some pictures or video along the way. To start off with, I'll show you how I check reels when I get them in. Alright, so the first thing I would check would be the line roller. I'm going to take a line, run it under it, cross it over, and then we'll just run it. And we can see that line roller is moving, so that seems fine. Next, I'll check the crank of the reel, see if there's any sluggishness going on there. I don't really feel that. I feel a little bit of roughness in the gears, but we may not be able to help that. The reel itself seems to work fine in that regard. So now we'll check the bail flip that way manually, and then we'll check it this way, and they both work well. Under here we have an anti-reverse switch. We see the anti-reverse is working well. Overall, this reel seems fine. All right, first thing we're gonna do is get the handle out of the way. We're just gonna remove it by unscrewing this tab over here. And if you notice, there's a bushing on there. This one looks like that. If you look at the schematic, there's some that have the bushing that goes inside, all the way inside. Then there's another flat bushing or washer that goes on this screw handle. Doesn't matter which one you have, not really, just as long as you don't lose it, and we'll be good. Now we just pull that out, just like so. And we're gonna start with the spool. To remove that spool, we're gonna undo the drag knob by turning it counterclockwise. And just lifting that straight up. Now I'll show you a few things under the spool. First, you'll see that there's a push lock under here. We're not going to remove that, we're just going to clean it up. But we are going to pull this rubber seal out just by getting under it and popping it up. Like so. When you get your rubber seal off, you'll notice there's a little groove in the middle right there that you'll want to make sure it seats properly back on the top of the spool when you put it back in. Once that seal is out, you can lift and remove your drag washers. One last piece to note here is that we have a bearing that's sitting inside. There might be a washer under there. Let's check that to see. And there isn't. So to clean this reel up, what I will be using will be Q-tips. Kind of just get inside the nooks and crevices there. I may end up using a brush to do the same sort of thing. And I will also be using paper towel to kind of wipe those things away. For these drag washers, if I keep them, I'm just going to put them between a paper towel like that and just squeeze to get any residual or get a lot of the grease or water that may be in it off of it so that we can apply our own stuff. Whenever you're looking at these felt drag washers, what you're looking for is to make sure they're fairly even in thickness across and that they're pliable. If those two things are there, you're pretty much in luck all the time and you can reuse them. All right, now that's cleaned out, we're going to go ahead and add some oil to a few places. One will be these drag washers. Just a couple of drops around it. You don't need to inundate this with oil. Next place will be this bearing that we took out of the spool. A couple of drops as well. And now we can put that back in. First thing we're going to put in there would be this bearing. Just drop it back in that hole. Then we'll stick our first felt washer in there. Next we'll take the thin washer. If you notice, there's one that's thinner than the other. Thin washer goes in first. Next felt washer, this eared washer, that will be going in looking like that with the tabs going into those two grooves. Then your final washer with the thick washer going on top. Now lastly, we'll put in this rubber seal. And if you notice, there's a tab that's skewed more to one side than the other. That tab will be facing down. And you want to make sure when you stick it in there that you push down on it and feel it pop into place. Like that. And you can tell usually if you just gently try to pick it up, it won't come out. Lastly, we have the bottom part, and I'm going to add some grease to a few places. Before I do, I'll let you know what kind of grease I'm using, which is pen reel grease. I'm just going to add grease to a couple of spots here, one right there around the clicker, a little bit on the spring if you want to, and one right there around that push pin for the line keeper. and that should work.
Okay, let's do a quick clean and lube of the handle. Not much to do here, but we are going to push that button in, then turn it sideways so we can access inside there. I'm just going to take my brush and clean that out because it's difficult to get in there to begin with. Just like so. I'll wipe this off. And I'm going to oil a couple points here. You can also add grease if you wanted to. Work that in. And the same thing for this little button right here. I'm going to press that in to work it in. And lastly, we'll do some here. And work that in. Now we can add some grease right here. And this is just so it doesn't stick or get frozen inside the main gear when you put that back in there. You can add some to that hole as well. But what I will actually do is add some oil to it. Hey, if you're finding the video useful, please hit that thumbs up button. It helps spread this video around YouTube so it gets more exposure. I'd certainly appreciate it. Now we're going to work on isolating the rotor so we can work on the line roller and the other pieces on there. To do that, I'm going to remove this click gear with the washers on top just by pulling up. And now we can undo that screw that's in there and undo the nut. You can open it up like this to access it. This is going to be righty-loosey. So turn to the right to loosen the nut. We're just going to kind of rock. Let's close that first. I'm going to kind of rock as we pull up to get that off. Now we're going to do a few screws. That screw there. I'm going to loosen that up and remove that one. The first side I'll take off will be this pivot side. I'm going to leave these screws separate just in case they're different sizes. Pull that up just like that. And now I'm going to separate this line roller assembly. And I'll lay that out for you so you see what the components are. This is the line roller screw. On there you'll notice that there's some ridges. That's to help lock it down when you screw it down. Now we'll separate this and I'll lay this out this way. You have a washer there, the line roller. If you notice, the line roller itself has a thin side here and then it slopes that way. This thicker part will be going towards the bail wire, so looking like that. Then you have a bearing, and I think that's it. Now to get this bail arm off, we're going to finish unscrewing this screw right here. I'm going to hold down on it just to be on the safe side. I'm holding on to this section and the bottom section so it stays in place. Those screws look to be the same size, so we don't need to worry about that too much. Then I'm going to gently lift this up. Like so. Just to relieve the tension of that spring. Nothing's really going to go flying anywhere, but just in case, let's go ahead and do it the way I did it. That side cover screw looks like that. Then you just have this trip arm, this holder, spring, and the pivot arm. Notice that this holder has a little tab on the bottom. That tab is going to go in that recess right there when we put it back together. Same process I'm going to do to clean this up with what I said earlier in the video. Now we're going to go ahead and oil this bearing. A couple drops will suffice. And grease a few places on here. One will be this little groove that the trip arm rides in. Around that post right there. Some inside that channel. Same thing for the other side. Some inside there. And around the post. For this, you can use oil if you want to. I like to use a little bit of grease since I deal with a lot of saltwater stuff. So inside there like that. We can also grease that point right there and inside this channel, as well as a little bit over that hole that's on the side right there. I don't always grease the bail spring, but you can and probably should. Same thing on the trip arm and this pivot right here. And lastly, we'll add some around there. Post and the base. You could stick a little bit of grease inside that hole where the screw is going to go. That just kind of helps it not lock in there. One final step is to go ahead and add some grease inside this channel right there in the hole where the pinion goes through. And that's it. Did miss one spot here. We want to also grease that pivot, or sorry, that little post right there. Some inside the hole where it goes over the post. And just some general areas around here like that. Now the first thing we'll do is separate this just so it's easier to work with. Take that, drop it over straight just like that, and then secure it with the screw. When you lock that screw down, just turn it to make sure it's turning. Now we're going to go ahead and set up the bail spring assembly. That long portion of the trip arm will be facing down. The shorter portion will be on the top side. we'll stick this in. Remember I said that recess, or sorry, that post goes into the recess there. And this is how it'll be looking when you put it in place. Just like so. Now we can stick our bail spring in. Like so. And take this pivot, or this arm, stick it in like that. And we're going to make sure that that's below the trip arm. Now when we have that all lined up, we're going to take the cover and cover it up and secure it so this doesn't move out of place. You want to make sure that holder is inside the recess that it needs to be before you get started on this step. So you just cover it up, and now we can secure that with the screw. Go all the way down on this one. And everything should be set. Now we're going to take our bail arm, and if you notice there's a hole right there and a groove right there. The hole will be for the arm coming out of the bail spring, and that groove will be for the trip arm that's on the bottom. So we're just going to take it, looks like that, cover it over, then we're just going to play with it as we push down it at an angle to get it set in place. And I'm going to screw this in because I know it's done, but I'll show you how you can check it afterwards to make sure that it's in the right spot. Snug it down, and we're going to test it like this, right? You can do this and you see it's working properly, so we know both of those posts went into the right places on the bail arm. But you also check the bottom, and notice that arm right there moves up and down when I move the bail arm. A couple more things we can grease will be this point right here inside the line roller, this washer, and then we can do the bearing as well. And the reason I do the bearing is because, since like I said, I deal with a lot of saltwater reels, or reels used in saltwater, we want to try to protect that as much as possible so that it doesn't rust or get frozen. Stick this in at an angle, looking like this, and turning it down. Now I'm going to put this bail arm down. We're going to stick on our bearing first. Line roller goes on. Remember, it goes looking like that. And now we can take the washer and stick it on like this, bring everything up, then secure it with the screw. Now we can always double check the line roller with the same method that we used to test the reel out and see that it's working. Finally, we can check the bail flip, and that looks good. Now let's go ahead and work on taking this reel apart. We're going to undo those 4 screws on the outside there. When I take these screws out, I'm going to lay them out just to make sure that they're the same size, and if not, then we know where they go. And as we can see, they're all the same size, so no need to worry there. Now let's go ahead and pop this up. Like that. Notice we have a bearing on there. We're going to remove that screw there first to get this shaft out. Now we can pull that shaft out, like so, and pull that gear out. Now what we have remaining here would be the block and a screw to remove that crosswind gear. I'm going to leave that in for now, but just bear in mind that when you are removing this bearing, you need to remove this crosswind gear first. I'm going to take this pin out so it doesn't shoot anywhere on me. And I'll show you how that goes back in when we're back, in terms of putting this eccentric back together. Now I'll get this screw out of there so I can remove that crosswind gear. For these screws, I'm going to keep them separate. The one for the block is a little bit smaller than the one for the gear. And inside that gear there's a bushing as well, a metal bushing that we'll see right there. Now we can take this and undo this so we can remove the pinion stack, and note that there's a spring that's right there. Just be careful for it, but just be aware that it's there so you can kind of keep your finger over it. Now we'll take those screws off, lift that cover up, and gently pull this stack out. Now we can remove that bearing cup like so. And now we can pull up this entire stack that's right there, while we note that the spring is still there, and we want to be careful that we don't lose that on the way up. So kind of just like that. And now we can take our spring, loosen that up from the bottom so that we have it free and by itself. Now we can take our screwdriver and just kind of lift that up out of there, and then set that aside. Next we have this retainer which holds this part of the anti-reverse clutch in place. I'm going to take a screwdriver, pop that in on one side, push in and up and it'll come out. Just be careful the spring's up on you. Next, let's go ahead and remove that eccentric. So just kind of get that out of the way. Pull the bearing out. And the last piece we have is this outside race for the anti-reverse clutch. Now we have a little bit of rust on here, so what I'm going to use would be Q-tips, but I'm also going to use Corrosion X to get that cleaned off as much as possible so we don't have an issue with it. Alright, welcome back. Now we're going to go ahead and add some grease to certain points in the reel and go ahead and get the pinion stack installed as well. First, let's do the greasing. I'm going to grease in here. Everything at this point is a light amount of grease. Somewhere on that post. And since this is a plasticky kind of reel, we're not going to add any grease to these holes. Just don't really need to. But we're going to grease in here. That's where the bearing, pinion, and the anti-reverse clutch goes in. And maybe some down in that hole right there that receives the base of the pinion. Next, we'll go ahead and grease this bearing cup, pinion gear. And although this is also a light amount of grease on it, I do grease the entire thing. Now we're going to go ahead and oil that bearing. We can then work that in. And now we're going to set up the roller pins back inside here. I had to clean this out a little bit because there was some rust in it, but it was still usable. First thing I'm going to do is set that in there, looking just like that. I'm going to take one pin and drop that flat inside, just like that. Now all I'm going to go ahead and do is press down or squeeze down with pliers. Just like so. And the same thing for the rest of them. Again, we're just laying that flat across the top of the hole it's supposed to go into, and then just squeezing it in. It'll just naturally pop into place when you squeeze it. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a few drops of oil. 1, 2, and maybe 3. That just helps coat it so it can rotate freely. Stick this inner race in. Then at this point I'm just going to work that in. Let the roller pins get the grease all around it. Now we can go ahead and remove the roller pin, stick it on the pinion gear looking like that. Then we're just going to drop that inside that hole right there. Now we're going to take this, drop that in looking just like that with that square, with the square between that gap right there and the other square along this base side right there, looking just like that. Now we're going to go ahead and use this cup to help push everything down, get everything in place. Now we can remove that, stick in this piece, and that back piece you see right there will go along the back side right here, but it'll look something like that. So I'm going to have it here, squeeze it and push it down just to get it started. And now we're going to go ahead and use our screwdriver, secure one side of it while you take it, pry it open, and then push down. Same thing for the other side. That's down and that's down. And now we have to work on the back. And I'm pretty sure we're there. And there we go. Now everything's just set in place. We can go ahead and put this back on now. Just make sure you double check that everything is flush, which this one is. At this point we can stick our bearing in. And now we can stick that spring back onto the post. That lower portion of the spring will fit towards the bottom. First thing I'm going to do is take that, hook it inside the actuator arm, go in from the bottom through that hole that's right there, Push that actuator over closer to the post. Take our pick, roll that spring up and down over the post. Then push it down to secure it. Like so. And you can always check it to make sure it's working, but we know it is. Now I'm going to add a light amount of grease onto this cover right here. Note that there's one hole in the middle that will go over this little post right here. Looking like this. It lines everything up for you. And you can go and secure the screws. While I put this last screw in, guys, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you appreciate the content. So it helps get spread around YouTube and gains more exposure. Snug these down. And everything there is secure. Last thing left to do would put that spacer on there. And we're good for the top. All right, now we're going to get into the main housing of the reel. If someone took this main gear off, this bearing was stuck or frozen on there. But on top of that, it was also a locked bearing, which means it didn't turn. That could have actually helped that feel, that rough feeling that I was having when I was cranking the reel. So fingers crossed when we put this back together that it'll feel a lot smoother because we got a new bearing to put on top of it. We're gonna go ahead and oil these two bearings. And just like the pinion bearing, we're gonna go ahead and work those in. First, I'm gonna put this bearing in, drop that in looking like that. And now we can take our crosswind gear, add some grease to it. And if you notice, this is just a light amount of grease that's going on top of it. And it doesn't need to be perfect. But I do grease the entire surface area of this. A little bit around that post. And I'm going to do the bottom as well. Now we're going to take this, put it on top of the post there in the housing. Rotate that to where that post is down towards the bottom somewhere like that. Take this bushing, put it on top. And now we can secure that with the screw. Make sure it rotates. Light amount of grease on top of that bushing. Next, we'll do the crosswind block, some grease inside that channel right there. And then the rest around the surface area of this, like I do for all the other gears. Final gear we have will be the main gear, and we're gonna follow the same process. We'll add some grease inside this hole right here. That's where the handle is gonna go through. And that just helps the handle from getting frozen inside there. Gonna take our crosswind block, drop it over the post, looking like that. Then we're gonna take our main gear and stick that in. Last thing we're gonna do here is take this eccentric, stick that up through the hole in the housing, put it through the gap in that actuator, make sure it goes all the way to the top, and then we're going to secure it with the pin that we took off. You want to make sure you turn this eccentric to where you see the flat side of the eccentric, push that as far as it can go. And I'm going to put my hand or my finger over this just to test it out to see if it works, and we can see that it's working. Now finally, I'm going to take the shaft, add some grease just along the bottom side of it where it interacts with the crosswind block. That flat side you see right there will be facing up towards the sky, looking like this. Stick it through our pinion gear, line those up, and make sure it goes in. You may have to play with this using the base of your thumb or something to get it lined up, but it should go right in. Finally, just secure it with the screw and a slight amount of grease over on top of it. Now for this cover side, we're going to take a light amount, just make sure it's a light amount of grease on here, and put it inside that hole right there. Take our shims, put that on top of the main gear, and then put our bearing on top of that. Looking like that. Now we're going to cover this up. And secure it with the 4 screws that we took out. Alright, now we can go ahead and add some grease to right here. That's just for the ramp to trigger the bail flip. Now we'll take that pinion, stick it through the hole in the bottom. Remember it's key, so you're going to rotate until it falls in place. Push it through like that and secure it with the screw. Remember this one is right to remove and left to put back on. When we get it close to the base, we're going to make sure we line up one of those flat surfaces or flat sides to that hole right there because we have to put our lock screw in. One tip is you can put some grease on the top of your screwdriver to help you secure the screw. Before we get to the end of this, I'm going to show you a couple of videos that you can check after this video to help you in your reel service journey. Take our click gear, drop that on there. That's also key. You need to rotate until it falls in place. Our washer, that's essentially our spacer for the spool. Then we're going to take this spool, Rotate until it falls in place because that is keyed as well, and then secure it. Now we're going to go ahead and test this reel out. First thing I'm going to test is the drag. We have already tested the line rotor, so we don't need to test that again. Okay, that drag feels pretty good. Stick our handle through and secure it with the handle screw from the other side. Now let's test the crank of the reel. Much better. So yes, it was the bearing that was causing that roughness that we felt earlier. Much better feel. Test the bail flip. That works really well. If you're interested in learning how to service your Shimano Saragosa SW, click right there. If not, feel free to check out my channel for additional videos on Daiwa reels, pen reels, etc. Thanks again for watching, guys. If you appreciate the content, like I said, please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel with your notifications turned on.